Leslie, when did you start collecting?
I had no intention of collecting originally. I just liked certain images that I came to out of art books, and at the Art Gallery of New South Wales I purchased prints of Drysdale when I was a student at university, and from that slowly developed after being in Europe.
Do you think that the collecting process educates your eye in terms of how you approach art?
Well, I think collecting's one long barbed wire fence of comparison and contrast. And so through sifting and through being pricked by the barbs of mistakes and delusions that you might have of beauty, you gradually, through that selection and contrast, comparing and so forth, you come to a general median throughout your collection that maintains a certain degree of uniformity, of strength. It's easy to deviate from that. You can easily be torn away from that, and momentarily I liked the certain images, and it was an exercise in sifting to find out what I could have on my walls that didn't tire me, or that after a time I didn't want to look at. I wanted works that were forever young, that were always immediate to me.
Did you have a particular theme when you started collecting? Was there a particular kind of work that you were attracted to?
Not really. I did like Australian landscape. Initially I liked 19th century landscape and early 20th century, but when I came to the early moderns, I fell head over heels in adulation of Roland Wakelin because of the strength of the forms in his works, the interesting skies that he could produce that seemed to roll over one's head, and the colour. And it's the colour that has been in many ways a theme throughout my collecting. So with the reds of mother and daughter reading, which is on the cover of the book, the catalogue, comes in the year 2010-11, the Tommy Watsons that are similar colour, that reds. It's not that I've wanted a red theme at all, but it's just the enchanting nature of colour that interested me.
You've written a book on Wakelin. Did this evolve from your collecting of Wakelin, or did you form some idea about writing about him for other reasons?
No. When I first started collecting Roland Wakelin, I came across what I describe as the Wakelin world. Sydney was still young in its galleries, etc., and there was for second-hand art, more or less, there was the studio shop in East Sydney, corner of Burton and Palmer, and Beth Main, whose portrait's in this show, she had this little gallery which had smaller works by famous artists, and she'd known Wakelin well. At this stage, Wakelin had died. He died in 71. This is later on in the 70s that I became familiar with Beth and the Wakelin world, and I purchased my first work, I think, in the mid-70s. I was going to buy a small landscape, and I was talked into buying a major work, which is Lavender Bay, which is in this show.
Yep.
And it embodies a lot of the colour music themes and expression that he was famous for. She told me to write the book because I was so enthusiastic. I kept saying to her, why are there 7 books on certain artists and none on some of the better artists? And she said, well, it was your job to do the book. And even though I'm not an art historian, she said that Wakelin would have liked someone like myself to write a book and show pictures because of my love for his work.
Wakelin belonged to a group called the Northwood Group, which was along with Lloyd Rees and John Santry and George Lawrence. Can you tell us about that group and how they came together?
Well, they came together because they were friends. They'd met at various exhibitions, mainly through the Macquarie Galleries.
Right.
And they all exhibited at the Macquarie Galleries. And they worked because they couldn't sustain a family and a home by, you know, selling their work. So they had like weekends, and they went on weekend trips together. One of the favourite places was North Ryde, which was then all semi-rural and market gardens, and it had lovely old homes and a good variety of subject matter. And that painting in the collection of North Ryde, where Macquarie University now stands, shows what a quick pace that area was developed. But I mean, apart from the fact of the history of the suburb, it's the extraordinary nature of that painting that's good. That road and the symbolism in it, and the strength of the simplicity of the work. It's wonderful.
And Rees, there's a painting, well, it's a study really, a preparatory sketch, I guess, of Lloyd Rees and Roland Wakelin together by Roland Wakelin. They had a close friendship?
They were very close. They were what one would call best friends. And Rees always referred to Wakelin as the master. And Wakelin was a real artist's artist, in that the other artists recognised his talents, and they recognised his greatness. The general buying public didn't warm to Wakelin as nearly as much as other painters. And Wakelin and Rees taught drawing later in their lives at Sydney University to the architecture classes, and before that they had worked together at Sidney Ure Smith's studio in the city. So that spans a period of about 40, 50 years of knowing each other. And Lloyd, I was lucky enough to catch Lloyd before he died when I was doing the book, and I had a lot of interviews with him and lovely lunches at his house, which were always very interesting, and managed to get, you know, a few details of Wakelin's life before he went. Yep. I actually went to the Royal Society's exhibition of early Cézanne in London in the early 90s, and you could have swapped any of those work for a Wakelin. They were almost identical. So it was extraordinary, the similarity between the early Cézanne and a lot of Wakelin's landscape. Extraordinary juxtaposition.
Can you tell us about the attraction to Gruner and how that affected your own art?
Gruner's light, the depiction of light in his paintings, fascinated me, and I thought they were probably the best examples of you know, impressionist to post-impressionist painting that we had in Australia. And when I started painting myself, I tried to emulate that feeling of light that I found in a Gruner, and I used his paintings as yardsticks to try to capture some of the strength that he had in that aspect. And then luckily I was able to get hold of that Spring in the Orchard, which was painted in Bowral. It was on Simon's property. He was a doctor, and he had a place in Bowral, and on the place there was a cottage which was known as Gruner's Cottage. He used to let Eliot use the cottage at the weekends or for holidays or whatever, and he did some of his greatest masterpieces on the Southern Highlands or in that vicinity, as well as out near Penrith near Richmond.
You've also got several women artists in the collection, including two works by Grace Cossington Smith, which I understand have not been exhibited previously. Can you tell me how you came across those?
Well, they came direct to Joyce Orchard again from Cossington Smith's home.
Right.
And I don't think they've ever been recorded or seen in a public to date. But the women artists, I always felt, were as strong as the men between the wars. Particularly, we lost a lot of good artists in World War One and World War Two, but the women were always very, very. I was very, very interested in the women artists because of their delightful depictions of scenes, and particularly in still life, like the Alison Ray Fish is a masterpiece. And when I saw the retrospective at the S.H. Irwin of Ray Fish's work, I realised I had a gem.
Yeah.
And I knew I had a gem anyway, but it confirmed my opinion. And actually, there's a story about when in the early 70s or the mid 70s, I met a girl called Jeanine Burke, who was written a lot about the women artists between the wars, and she, I was talking to her, I don't know whether it remained in her mind, but she was first year university at the time, and I said to her, you should concentrate on the women, because there's a real strength there, and she's made a lifetime occupation of that, and she's written maybe a dozen books or more about
she's
the
women. She's a
women.
well-known Australian writer now.
Yes, and wonderful books by Burke.
You've also got Elsie Davidson Stewart and Lorna Nemo. They're artists previously unknown to me, but you knew them personally. Can you tell me a bit about them?
Well, yes, Elsie Davidson Stewart is Joyce Orchard's sister.
Right.
She's lives in Vaucluse. She's a painter with the Watercolour Institute. She's been blind for about 12 years, so she hasn't worked, obviously. But her best friend in her student days at the East Sydney Tech, as it was then known, which is now the National Art School, was Lorna Nemo, and they were teenagers in the 30s. And they maintained a friendship throughout their lives. And it was through knowledge of them and that I came across the works. Particularly Lorna Nemo was very important academic in the art world. She was head of art at New South Wales University for a time. She won the Wynne Prize. She was a very good painter and academic.
So she was quite important in her time.
Yes.
We've talked a little bit about Alison Ray Fish. Do you know much about Alison's?
Well, a lot of her work was destroyed. There was a fire in the barn that they used as a studio in Bowral. She was married to George Duncan, and
who's an artist as well.
Who was quite a well-known artist, and her work could be divided into two groups, like those watercolours, which are have a rather Art Deco feeling about a lot of them, as well as a delightful depiction of, say, flowers or objects that one has on, in one's home. The actual work of Ray Fish, of course, suffers because of that fire, so there's not a lot of her wonderful work that we should have.
It's a shame. Okay, Leslie, we were just recounting an anecdote about Herbert Gallup that was interesting because it involved something to do with the Shire, or at least near the Shire, with the Royal National Park and his painting trips.
Yes, it was. Well, one of the favourite spots to go on excursions, either by car. Some of the girls had families that were reasonably wealthy and they did have cars, but they'd sometimes go by train to Cronulla and go across to Bundeena. And the teachers from the National Art School took them down there. Herbert Gallup, there's two works in this show by Herbert Gallup, the Hawkesbury scene and the one from Vaucluse looking towards Manly with the picnic on the rocks. Herbert used to take them down there and paint, and both in oils and watercolour, and they'd go to Bundeena and Gary and to Wattamolla and places in the national park. They had a great fascination for them, and their records of the works with painters like McAnally as well, of Cronulla area and the waterways in that area are wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful historic remembrances of the middle of the 20th century.
So they were he was teaching at the National Art School, Herbert Gallup.
Herbert Gallup was teaching there, and Elsie Stewart told me a wonderful story about how when he was teaching them, he taught anatomy, and he used to say, watch their hips and their haunches, because he was slightly Cockney, and he dropped his H's, and it was often the girls used to have a bit of a giggle about all that.
Yeah.
But he was a wonderful teacher, apparently, and certainly a wonderful painter.
Yes, I found that there's a gallery at the Charles Sturt University campus, Wagga Wagga, which is the H.R. Gallup Gallery, which is not a gallery showing his work, but it's a gallery, although they have a collection of his work, I believe, it's a gallery for students to show him. So,
wonderful. Well, that's new to me. You see, that's something else that one learns and one explores later, which I will do.
Yeah. John Drummond Moore is a favourite artist of mine, I have to say, and he has a work in the Arco in New South Wales that I always enjoy seeing, a painting of the harbour. And you've got one which I think is a recent acquisition.
Yes, I bought it at Christie's. It's a good scene of Bronte in 1925, a watercolour. He was a great watercolourist, architect, John D. Moore. The painting in the Art Gallery of New South Wales is wonderful because it's into the light again, looking west from Rose Bay near the convent there, towards the bridge.
Yeah. And
it's got all the activity in the afternoon of the light coming in from behind the sails of the yachts and on the water and in from the clouds and so forth. It's a magnificent landscape, that one.
Yeah, it is. It's very nice. And some of your other more recent acquisitions have been of contemporary Indigenous paintings. What triggered your interest in these works?
Well, it was on the slow boil for decades, and I'd been fascinated by Indigenous art, particularly the rock art, and the work on artefacts like shields and boomerangs, etc. But I'd never really collected anything like that until I came across the elderly people who'd taken up painting in the last 20 years whose work fascinated me because of its form and its colour and its spirit. Unbelievable spirituality, I suppose. Their dreamings, their stories, which are not divulged or are divulged in certain cases. But they started to enchant me, and it gave rise to Breaking the Bank at Monte Carlo, more or less, because I got some very good Kubuchis over in Western Australia, who's Emily's younger brother, Kubuchi, Kingarowi, and more recently I've managed to be able to get some good Tommy Watsons from the Agathon galleries, having known its principal, Johnny Anyu, who actually has learnt their languages and lives with them and enables them to be stable and content enough to be able to produce these masterpieces.
Yeah, Nima Tommy Watson seems to be a feature of the collection. What attracts you to his work?
Colour again, but it's beyond colour. It's the strength, the spirit. There's one work that looks as if it could be the beginning of the world, an aspect of the beginning of time. They're just powerful. They're beautifully formed. The colour is magnificent. The intensities are enduring. They're remarkable works. It's wonderful to have that at this stage in one's life, to have new painters coming on the scene, particularly from the Indigenous area, that are magnificent.
And you've met Tommy Watson, am I right in thinking that?
Yes, yes.
And can you tell me about that and how you came to meet him?
Well, I met him at the gallery in Sydney when he was having a show called The Last Show. He wasn't that well, and he thought he may not have another show. I doubt whether he will have another show. He produces the odd work still, but he doesn't speak English, and so my level of communication was minimal. But I think he got the message that I liked his work, and he was a wonderful man just to sit with and feel his presence.
Do you get much of the background stories behind their paintings at all when you're purchasing them?
You do in some cases. They tell their story, it's on the certificate. But with Tommy, he won't give out his stories. He believes they're private and sacred. He believes that giving out one's dreamings and sacred stories is bad luck.
Okay.
And he thinks that a lot of the painters have died prematurely because they'd revealed their secrets.
Many of the Indigenous works, of course, are linked to the land. Is it important to you, this attachment to landscape or land?
Well, it is. I mean, in my white man's collection, there's a lot of landscape. The landscape is where we are. With the Aboriginal work, it's all about country. The country is multi-dimensional. It's not only just the physical landscape, the rocks and the valleys and the waterways and so forth. The country is their spirit. It embodies their ancestry. It embodies their art history in a way, their history of their creativity, the history of their dreamings, the history of their very essence. And it's the country that painters like Kubachi and Tommy Watson, a lot of them call a lot of their paintings My Country.
Yeah.
And it's to do with it's an impression of who they are rather than where they are. To interpret a landscape of an Aboriginal artist is to interpret their entire existence.
So, going back to the collecting, where do you think your collection or collecting practice is heading now?
I hadn't thought really beyond the latest Tommy Watsons. I'm still reeling from that. But I would hope that it is some more international art in Europe. I would hope that it's sculpture, to be able to place it at Kookaburra in Kangaroo Valley. And to be able to get more of the younger white artists' works that I find fascinating.
Well, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.